What's up, friends? Welcome to SPDM TV. My name is Mike, part of the SPDM crew, and I watch a lot of TV. We talk about various TV topics, reviews, and general appreciation of TV, past and new. You could follow me on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Serialized at MLHilty2452 to see what all I'm watching.
But
Go.
Yeah.
This week, we're going to be talking about Scrubs. So we're going to try doing something different where we talk about a show kind of like by season as opposed to the entirety of a show or like a specific episode. So joining me on this journey with Scrubs are fellow buster of Tim Larsen's balls, Aaron Lashbrook and Brian Larsen. Fellas, thanks for coming out tonight. Thanks for thanks for chilling. No, that's even worse. Thanks for jumping on to talk about Scrubs. How's it going?
it's going good. I think you started your trivial when you host trivia. Thanks for coming out tonight, folks. Welcome to the bar. Well,
I mean, I don't record on Tuesdays too terribly often now, but Wednesdays, yeah, like I think that's part of the reason why is because I do get into like a trivia mode where like, yeah, appreciate, looking forward to the night, everyone, and it's just super weird, but whatever. It is what it is. So, Aaron,
Yeah.
this is
Thanks
your
for having.
first.
Well, I was just gonna
Yeah.
say thanks for having me and putting this together, and I think it's gonna, be interesting, and I hope it goes well.
Aaron, this is your first time on SPDM TV specifically, because Brian's done what? You've done Smallville and we've done How I Met Your Mother, right? So looking forward to a three-man weave when it comes to Scrubs. And why don't we just start with this? Why don't we get some background as to how you first got into Scrubs in the first place? So, Aaron, how'd you get into Scrubs?
Avid TV watcher. It was
Mhm.
had no idea. Like watched it from the beginning. Don't know. I mean, and Brian and I, we're together at the start, hanging out quite often when
Mhm.
this show came out. I don't remember exactly. Brian, where would we have been? Would I have been on 13th Street when this came out?
2001.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, you would have been 13th Street,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't have been.
Yeah, but you still would have been around a lot. But yeah, it's one of those shows. I'm not going to say that, I sat around and watched TV at that time a lot more than Brian did. He was like heavily into softball and stuff. I might have said somewhere in my memory, I may have watched the first episode and, got a hold of Brian and said, hey, this might be the next big thing. This is something we got to watch together. You're going to like these guys. But like I said, I just a TV watcher that it came on. I don't know if it had a lot of hype, if it had a big push, for the fall release.
Mm.
But it was something I watched right from the start and, immediately fell in love with.
Brian, how about you?
Yeah, pretty much just like Aaron said, we both are TV movie watchers, and we
Mhm.
talk about the shows when we would hang out and such, or do lines and quotes and things from movies and TV. So I do think Aaron had caught it first and got a hold of me and let me know, hey, make sure you check this out. You're gonna something right up your alley.
I did not watch the show from the start. I was maybe about three or four seasons in before I started watching it consistently. And I caught this first on DVD when the box sets first started to come out because I had a friend who I got this for her because she wasn't feeling great one day. And she was like, why don't you stick around and watch some of these? I'm like, no, I'm good because I'm one of those people who if it seems too good to be true, then it probably is. And I've heard so many good things about Scrubs that I was like, there's no way that I could possibly think that this is this good. Plus, also, I'm not much of a medical procedural anything when it comes to shows. So I never really got into ER. I never got into Grey's Anatomy, anything like that. And there was something about that kind of made me a little bit nervous because how do you make comedy in a hospital? Because I wasn't like worried about like it being like insensitive because I didn't give a shit about, being sensitive or anything like that. But like how can you make certain situations like this funny? And it's at the very heart of its show, it's a workplace comedy, which that does present a lot of things where it's like, huh, I had never thought of it for that perspective for a doctor about how much some of the things about working in medicine actually really suck, but how there's also a lot of good that you could possibly do as well. And this show does very much steer into a lot of dramatic elements because I think by its very nature, you kind of have to at some
Right.
point. So I, it's funny because what coming back to like season one, boy, the show was really different in this first season. It feels a little bit more like toned down a little bit. And I think I do appreciate that a little bit because that was something in the later seasons that kind of grated on me. So
That box set that you bought your friend, was it season one or
it
was
was
it, you
it
know,
was it was season one. It was like it was one also where like the front like the front part looked like a clipboard as well. It's like, oh, this is cool from a packaging standpoint. So that also caught my attention as well. None of the other seasons were that cool. They were just standard box sets, but that one for the first season was actually pretty cool. So, do you guys like rewatch this show very often or like catch reruns very often, or is this something that, it's an annual occurrence where you do like a scrub binge? So, Brian, go ahead and start. What do you think?
Well, for me, if I catch it on Comedy Central, I think still runs it. If I catch an episode, I won't change the channel, and which usually leads me to binge watching the whole series on Hulu.
Hmm.
I guess I would have watched this probably like start to finish at least 10 times,
Hmm.
if not more. And then there'll be times where like I'll just catch a clip or something on Reels and then turn that and I'll go find the episode that was on and watch it. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's very easily can take over for, a couple of weeks on streaming services when I don't have anything else to watch.
How about you, Aaron?
yeah, I'm more of the latter where Brian was saying I'll see a clip, Turk dancing or whatever, and then, I'll go find that episode and rewatch it, and then maybe watch one or two on either side of it. But I haven't been one to sit down and rewatch the whole series since like Hulu first came out through the computer and it was
Hmm.
free
Yes,
and
I
it
remember
was
those
so
days.
crazy. And I was waiting. I felt like Chandler and Joey, like I had to keep watching because if I turned it off, it would go away by some accident. Hulu was free on my computer because there was nothing like that at the time where you could just
Hmm.
watch whatever you wanted. But yeah, episodes, if they're doing a marathon, I'll catch 3 or 4 in a row. But, you know, other than the original watch through when it aired, probably sitting down and rewatching it from start to finish, maybe once. So
There, this was kind of a line of a couple of different shows that I would watch or I would binge pretty consistently, usually like around once a year. So between this, usually did that with Friends, usually did that with The Office. Like I usually skipped around with The Office a little bit more. I usually skip the first season and just call it a day. And then Parks and Rec, same thing. But with Scrubs, I usually watch that from the very start because there's some important stuff in the first season that comes back at some point. So you kind of have to pay attention a little bit more. And it's helpful because some of the more interesting characters in this that have kind of different storylines, they come back. So, like for example, John Ritter, who is JD's dad, he himself does not come back, but the situation with him comes back when he dies, like spoiler for a show that's like over 20 years old. So if you're upset that I'm going to spoil a show about 20 years old, like fuck it, who cares? Or go watch the show. Like stop listening to this and start watching the show and get back to us. So to start our conversation about Scrubs, I figured we might as well just start with the pilot. And what do you remember about the pilot? Like I didn't ask you all to like go back and like rewatch the entire season. If you did, cool. Or if you caught just some of the highlights, even better. But what do either of you remember about the pilot that really like stood out to you?
Aaron?
Okay. For me, I did go back because, I said, thanks for putting this together. We had talked about this. How long ago was that?
It's
Would you say?
been a while. It's
3
been a
months?
couple months. It's been a couple months. Yeah.
Right after we talked about it, I was like, oh, firing it up, on Peacock. And I watched, seasons 1 through, I think I got through about 4, like in a day and a half or 2 days, like hammering it out. So to the point where like I'm thinking back on it and I've actually, I know I've run episodes together and stuff like that just because I watched so much so fast. But as far as the pilot, just the thing that grabbed me was the interaction of the characters. Not necessarily that anything was super fleshed out, but I don't know, the genuineness I thought I felt from just some of the relationships. I loved, the janitor right away. That harassment, the conflict. Anything particularly else that stood out? Can't think of right now. So Brian, you go ahead. And I'll probably piggyback on some of the things that you say.
Sure. The introduction of all the characters, obviously it's a pilot, so we're learning about everybody as they are being introduced. JD, who new doctor, very unsure of himself, thinks, well, hey, at first he's not, it sounds like he's confident and look, I'm, doing this conversation with myself in the mirror before and get there to the hospital. And then it's like, I realize I don't know anything. And it's like, yeah, that's in healthcare, there are times where you're just, you think you know what's going on and something new is always coming up. So I liked the fact that your star is somebody who is unsure of himself. It wasn't a stud, watch this guy, be who he is and lead the way. And Turk being his best friend, those two interacting, the Dr. Cox, Dr. Kelso, he thinks Dr. Kelso's the nicest guy and he's my safety net. And it's like, well, if he's the bad guy, who's the hero? And then, boom, Dr. Cox is there giving him shit. And they did a nice job with Elliot being here. She's ultra competitive. We're going to race, and they immediately establish in JD's mind is where we are for at some point during every episode. He's going to disappear into his mind and we're going to see whatever fantasy he goes through. So the pilot did a nice job of setting up how the story is going to be told every episode. And that's one thing that I really liked. And being somewhat of a daydreamer kind of person, just made a connection and, right away, this is a show I want to watch every week.
Yeah. To go along with that, there's the introduction of the outer monologue that was going on. And the clips, that was something that was different. It wasn't until this last rewatch and right away it hit me and I had to look up when, Family Guy came out and I'm like, who got it from who? And, Family Guy was first. So I'm like, this is kind of like a live action Family Guy, and they, I just wonder if, in development, I'm sure they had the plans and everything, but I really liked the way that worked. And I wasn't a big Family Guy fan when it first came out. So I did not put the two together at all. And I still don't. I just see a little similarity there. And, I do like it. It keeps things interesting. It keeps it irreverent where, you see the real thing that's going on, but the fantasy is always better, even if it's worse, like scarier or more dramatic or, whatever. It does such a good job in 4 to 20 seconds of really honing in on what you're supposed to be feeling as a watcher, or at least what empathizing with JD, what he's feeling in the situation.
And then like you get later on in the series where other people start to do it as well, and you get to see their take and their perspective. But that is something that upon rewatching the pilot, which I just rewatched it today. It's been a while since I've seen the pilot. And that was one thing that kind of stood out was, these clips and these moments where we get some introspectiveness from JD, where we get in his head. Boy, they go off the rails in the later seasons, and they're funny. I really enjoy them, but these ones, they're a little bit more toned down, and I really appreciated that. Couple other thoughts that kind of stood out. Aaron, I fully agree with you. Love the dynamic between him and the janitor from the very start. Just Neil Flynn, who is the janitor, is just great. He's probably one of my favorite characters in this entire series for
As
like
far
the
as
whole time
as
as
far
well.
as character arc, I mean, he goes from being a fairly one-dimensional foil in the first season to, I mean, we learned so much about him and what he's into, and
But
kind
his
of
name.
nothing at the same time.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah,
because you
it's
never
always
know when he's
changing.
completely lying.
Exactly.
I know
So
it's a later season, but maybe one of the greatest lines in this whole series is, "Why isn't your Lake Titicaca filled with boobies and poop?" I mean,
yeah,
it's so sorry. I
little,
know it's not this season, but we can look
but
forward to that.
yeah, we could just look forward to that. It's all good. The Dr. Kelso and Dr. Cox dynamic also really stood out in this episode because you've got Chief of Medicine who, seems like he's got everyone's best interest at heart. And then you really set up that Dr. Cox is going to be somebody that takes care of JD in his own unique way. And that's something that I really appreciated from the start. And then the last two things, the music in Scrubs has always been a standout to me. Whether it's, NBC just, taking from the Universal catalog or whatever. But I've always liked the music from this. Even the theme song, I I really like. I always thought that it was good. And I guess the last thing is I can't remember how long it's been since I've seen the pilot, but I completely forgot that the hospital looks completely different
Right.
in the first episode.
Yeah.
Like where are we? What hospital is this? Because in the next season or in the next episode, it's like, oh, like the walls look really nice. Just it's like been transformed. And yeah, I understand that for a pilot, you just take what you can get, and it's not always going to be shot in the same exact way. But that to me was also very stark. And then I said one more. I said one more thing, but I do have one other thing. Watching this on Peacock, the episodes are in full screen, not widescreen.
Right.
There, it's I sometimes forget that shows this old. Oh yeah, we're not in high definition
Yeah,
territory consistently,
4x3, baby.
and that just bummed me out a little bit because I'm like, oh, this show is old, and this show is old enough to drink right now. So great, great. That's fun. Any other thoughts about the pilot or anything else that anybody wanted to mention before we kind of just hit on, some of the characters and just some of the story beats for this season that really stood out?
We didn't really talk about JD and Turk at all. Just those two, you start out and he's kind of, the medicals geeks, the surgeons are studs and but he really needs his friend. And then it's the situation where he's, did you sign the lease? Did you sign the lease? And they're like, yeah, I did. I got the keys from you. So it shows Turk having his back at all times, even though they are completely different people. And, that friendship it comes across on the screen very well.
Yeah, they're a good blend. And I don't know if you want to get all metaphysical, but
Yeah,
yin and
let's
yang.
do it. Yeah, let's do it.
Yin and yang. You've got the emotional sensey. You've got the Brian already mentioned the dichotomy of the medical nerds and the cutters being the cool guys. But even though they have different philosophies, or I wouldn't even say different philosophies, different mannerisms throughout the universe, through how they express themselves, they have very similar core values.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like you can get to the same place from different directions. You can get to the find your things you have in common rather than your differences, because they have tons of differences too. But their main values of, and I would even say, even JD and maybe it becomes, characters change as you go through the seasons, uh, and it's hard to separate everything that you know about them throughout other seasons. But I would say, even though JD's portrayed as the sensitive character, that Turk usually has the more grounded, more core values that, and a lot of times they use it to JD's losing his way, and they use Turk as an anchor to bring him back because he reminds him, that's why we're here. This is what we're doing. You said you'd do this kind of stuff. But just, yeah, the dichotomy of how they act very different, but when they're childish, when they're goofing around together, they're very similar. But they have that same, they have each other's back, and love for friends and family, and all that stuff that matters, even though they take on life in different ways.
Also, with the introduction of Carla and Laverne, who don't jump out at you right away, but you know they end up being important characters as the season keeps going, and you don't realize how big of a role Carla's going to play, but you also kind of do just from the pilot and her interacting with JD right away.
Carla could have just easily been just a sassy nurse, and that's really about it. And the fact that it does, like, the show is clearly saying that, like, nurses matter a great deal in the medical industry more than, like, past shows potentially give nurses credit for. That's something, as a kid of a former nurse, I've always appreciated about this show, about how they're not shy about pulling any punches about how much it sucks sometimes to be a nurse and how much they get shit on by doctors. And you even see it a little bit in the pilot, a little bit about how like the nicknames in the show are just so damn on point. I love it so much. And it starts with Carla calling JD Bambi. It's like, and that's a nickname that sticks with him the entire show. And what a perfect nickname for him as he's just like trying to get his bearings under him. Like, there's a scene in the pilot where, like, there's a lot of or like camera lens flares, and like everything's like all chaotic, and JD just looks super stressed out. And as somebody who like gets anxious when it comes to like medical anything, I can't imagine what that's like on your first like week as an intern at a hospital, when by all accounts, like, this hospital isn't like in a shit neighborhood, but like there's also a lot going on here, that things come up, and it's got to be really chaotic. So, and what I think what Aaron said that kind of stood out was that Turk is kind of like the anchor for JD, and I agree with that. And it eventually does become Turk, and even Carla to some extent or another become a little bit more of an anchor, because Carla has no problems, like telling JD when he needs to like get his shit in order, kind of similar to Turk. And that's probably one of the reasons that makes them such a strong couple to begin with. But yeah, that's something that I'm glad that they established in the pilot from the very start, that, you know, Turk and JD have been friends a long time. They've been through a lot together, and this is just part of just the start of just another chapter in their life where they get to continue to expand on their friendship, but also learn what it means to be a doctor in these two different fields. So, all right. So I sent you both a list of a couple storylines, a bunch of characters. We've kind of talked on some of the characters. We haven't really talked about Elliot. So yeah, let's start with that, because we've talked a little bit about JD, we talked a little bit about Turk. Let's talk a little bit about Elliot. So to me, like, I knew the actress who played Elliot because she was in Roseanne. I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting that she's gonna be in this. But Brian, give me some of your initial thoughts on Elliot as, just a character, and kind of somebody that's a little bit different from, this core cast for, the main three characters.
The actress, yeah, I saw her in Roseanne also, and I remember seeing an interview early on that her nickname was Second Becky on set. She portrayed what happens a lot in the medical field for women who aren't nurses. I mean, because in the 60s, when the women were nurses, men were doctors. And if you see a woman in scrubs in a hospital, I hate to say it, and all the feminists can get as mad at me as they want, but you immediately think nurse. You don't, till you see him in a white coat, you don't think doctor. And Elliot did a nice job of trying to smash that concept. And she was very proud, knew she had to fight hard to be a female doctor. She didn't jump into bed right away with some of the other doctors. And with this, the comedy that it was, there was, that happening. I worked in a hospital for a little while as an occupational therapist, and I never once had sex in the on-call room. I'm a little pissed off about that because I watched ER and Chicago Hope, and they all did it. How come I didn't? But maybe it was just me.
Oh, well, hold on. Did you present that as an idea for you to do with one of your coworkers?
I did not
Or
because I
or
enjoyed
or
my
lo-
job.
or love interest, just coming in for a quick visit and then or not so quick visit, I don't know. So, but
I,
never,
I didn't
not
throw the idea out there. I didn't see like, hey, did you watch ER last night when George Clooney and we could do no. I didn't pursue it. I just thought they would, and none
I
of them
delivered newspapers for 3 years in middle school, and not
no,
once did anybody offer to pay their 275 via touching anything.
it was just a booby flash or a booby flash.
They
No,
covered it actually.
yeah, I think the Elliot was written very well for this first season. The character actually developed. She had a love interest obviously she had a flirting interest with JD, and we dealt with that, which I love the fact they didn't draw that out. It was subtly in the background, subtly in the background, boom, here's one episode of it. We got through this episode and we're done. Okay, it's kind of a background thing, and then they introduced TV's Scott Foley, and he became Sean, the boyfriend. So yeah, the Elliot character was just developed very well. Beginning early on, she was nervous, but she was a strong woman who did her job pretty well. Hid in the same closet at one time as JD, and they have the other episode where they were about to kiss, and Dr. Cox shows up and Cox blocked them.
blocks. Yep.
And
Yeah.
and he's got, they do the clock with the 48 hours where they got to kiss again or they'll be in the friend zone. And, again, a JD fantasy minute where he thinks about getting put in the friend zone. And so I think they did a very good job, the writers, developing all the characters. Elliot, the big three, we can call it Elliot, Turk, and JD. They did a good job with all three, but outstanding job with Elliot.
Aaron, anything to add about Elliot?
Elliot, I'd put, Brian was just saying the big three. It's almost, I would go 2 and 2. JD and Turk, they have their whole thing, and the show is obviously focused around them, more JD than Turk. But as far as Elliot, and I would throw in Dr. Cox, I don't know how writing rooms work. I don't even know what a writing room is, or if the show even had one. I'm assuming there's tons of writers or several writers. Those two characters, from episode to episode, from season to season, it felt like what I would, in my mind, in my JD, fantasy, there's a room full of smoke and people writing, but there's 3 or 4 or 2 people that are in a different area and they're writing for Cox, and there's 3 or 4 or 2 people in an area writing specifically for Elliot, because their characters, it seemed like they were made for the part and the part was made for them. And the way they acted, not just acting, but Cox is over the top and dramatic and loves his long rants, but that was him. And you can't separate that from the actor. And the same with Elliot, the neurotic behaviors and how they went with what she was saying, the acting and the person and the words for those two characters, I think bar none. The words that were coming out of their mouths and the way they were acting was perfect. I couldn't
Mhm.
see another person playing either of those characters.
No,
I agree with you on that. Yeah.
I definitely agree with you on that. And at first, I think I kind of felt that about Elliot, but as the show progresses, I think I felt that a lot more with Dr. Cox in general because Dr. like Dr. Cox kind of has a tough spot that he's in this case because he is somebody who he's been around the block. He knows how to give people some very sound advice, even if it is not delivered in the most bedside mannery way. But that experience is super helpful, especially for these group of doctors who don't know any better. They're just going off of what they learned in medical school, which I'm sure we've all been there when it comes to starting a new job where it's like, well, it doesn't say, I'm not saying like we all like take everything by like at face value and by the book based on like the manual or how you're trained on stuff, but we've all been there at a job where you're trained on something and then you get on the floor and they're just like, yeah, that none of that shit applies right now. You just
Oh,
got to do what you got to
absolutely.
do.
That's
So
100% accurate when it comes to medical. Yeah, you learn all the terminology, you learn all the basics, but until you get on the floor and you're doing it, it's completely different.
I think one thing that I like about Elliot a lot as a character is that not only did she, kind of what Brian was saying about kind of bucking some stereotypes when it comes to women in the medical industry specifically in like becoming a doctor, it's that Elliot also, she wasn't your typical love interest per se, because she was also super competitive in a lot of ways. We see that from the very jump about how competitive she can get, with racing up the stairs or, not giving someone an answer or not giving JD an answer to a question at rounds when she knows the answer herself just to make her. Because I imagine that, yeah, it is probably that competitive. Not everyone's going to be an asshole about it, but I'm sure it is competitive to
Mhm.
some extent or another. And that kind of has been something that remains pretty consistent throughout her character arc is that she is a very competitive individual. Whereas like someone like JD, he's not like he's a very caring individual. He's sensitive. So, like being super competitive about stuff, that's not really his thing. And that's one of the things that I thought would have bonded her and Turk a little bit more from the start, but they have pockets of instances where they would interact with each other. Like I watched the episode where Elliot comes and hangs out with JD at their apartment, and she is just keeps inserting her foot in
Yep.
her mouth by saying stupid shit like, "Oh, is that Morgan Freeman?" It's like, "No, that's my mom." Like, dude, like stop talking. Like,
Right.
but I did appreciate the fact that, Elliot didn't take shit from a lot of people and she stood up for herself. And was it always in the most effective way? No, but at the same time, I still did appreciate the fact that she was not your typical love interest where all she was doing was doting over JD and then that's it.
I
I
think they did.
also, oh, go ahead, Aaron.
Sorry. I think they did a good job with her. Once again, like I said, writing for her. And it could get distracting because everybody's mentioning, she had the strong personality and would stand up for herself. But then in the same episode or even a couple episodes later, she'd have a breakdown. And that's real life. That's what some days you feel great and everything's clicking, and other days nothing goes right. And it wasn't just a one-dimensional character, even though she wasn't my favorite. I do respect how it just wasn't the same old everyday. She was the tough girl all the time that didn't take no shit from anybody,
Mhm.
or she was a basket case that was always crying. She was both, and
Yeah,
sometimes shit in between.
you're right. And I didn't go with that part when I was talking about her. It seemed like when it came to decisions and the nurses seemed like things like that, she had that strong personality. But then whenever Kelso called her sweetheart, for instance, and she,
Mhm.
oh, or Dr. Cox got in her head, that's when the crying moments happened. But I mean, there was even the instance where the nurses were giving her a hard time and she tried to drag Kelso into it. And she's like, is there a special way to get a chart from the nurses? And he was like, do not drag me into your battle with those people. They will kill you. So yeah, there was times where she, like you said, you identify in real life. You can be strong in a moment, and then there's other moments where you're, on the verge of tears, just stressed out.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've touched on a lot of the other characters. I think one character that we haven't touched on yet is we're going into some not lesser characters, but characters who aren't in as much of the season. And this is our first introduction to Jordan, which we find out that she's like a trustee for the hospital or something like that. Like
She's
I
on the
never under
board.
oh,
She's on the
I
board.
I don't understand how hospitals work because they are like they're businesses. They like I don't get how hospitals work sometimes. So pardon me if I sound ignorant about that. But she's on the board, and then she was a patient and she like hooks up with JD, and then you find out that she's Dr. Cox's ex-wife. So give me some thoughts on what you first or how you felt about Jordan as a character so far. Aaron, go ahead.
Loved her from the start. Was a big fan, and Brian's a savant. Dude, when you go with like producers and directors and
This
comic
is
book
recording,
artists,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
you being able
I
to
want that clip.
remember lots of names,
I will make sure to cut that. I'll make sure to cut that from the final
I
product.
didn't
It's all
call him
good.
an idiot savant. I just called him a savant. But he's really good at remembering actors' names and stuff. Point of my story is I knew her from coming out of the Drew Carey show.
Yep.
So I already liked her from that. And what a introduction. Yeah, greatest way to bring a character in and just cause havoc. I loved it. Loved every minute of it. I loved her character. As far as who she was and where she came from, chef's kiss. How they twisted, turning JD from this amazing thing that happened, oh my God, this terrible thing just happened, and it was perfect. So, Brian, what did you think of her introduction or her as a character?
They did a very nice job of introducing her as the, stuck up board member, the person who gave the most money's daughter. That's why she's on the board. Ends up Dr. Cox's ex-wife, obviously. And then they have to go to her to save his job because pretty sure that's the one where he punched Kelso and because he was hammering on Elliot. And no, that was a different one. Different season. No, he did something and he got himself in trouble and they were gonna job was in jeopardy. So JD, after sleeping with her, goes back to and is like, hey, I need a favor. And by the way, never mention that we had sex to Dr. Cox because it will destroy me. So no, Jordan's character, just introduction, very good episode. They continue to use her well, and she stuck around for so many seasons. Probably because the guy who created it, Bill Lawrence, that's his wife in real life. Yep. So, but yeah, the Jordan character's just another one, that you can get behind. She's kind of bossy, kind of bitchy. Well, I think he just laid there and she did what she wanted. But
she talked about many pool boys and cabana boys. And flight attendants.
But I loved Jordan. Thought it was just continually a great character.
So the fact that she was on the board, that would have made for an interesting dynamic by itself. But to make her Dr. Cox's ex-wife, I think that was just a brilliant move because you don't see it as much this season because they're still largely estranged, but you see it throughout the course of the series, just like the love-hate relationship that they do have. And as you see that it turns a little bit more into, a loving, kind of healthy relationship. This season, though, they hate each other. And that made for that made for just some amazing moments between Dr. Cox and Jordan. A couple of the characters to hit on the Todd. What a ridiculous, just every sitcom needs to have, the guy like, hey, and
Mhm.
the Todd just started off as just, another surgeon, and then throughout the course of the show, he just gets like progressively worse. But this season, he's pretty toned down as, just somebody who's just a scalpel jock. That's it.
And they did, I would say that they made him not dumb, but the idea of he's just a cutter. And,
Mhm.
he's got Doc tattooed on his arm and never has sleeves on and high fiving and keeps coming up with a different term for a high five. It was, they stereotyped surgeons, and Todd was the perfect example.
Yeah, one where you guys both said they had maybe an idea, a sketch, a guy that they were going to use to be kind of the bro, and just let him devolve throughout the seasons. He started off as the high five guy, and then just became the sex crazed, probably latent homosexual. Just all these weird things about him. You know, that just kept building on his interestingness,
Yeah.
and I don't think at any point, like, he's never mean. He never is actively working against anybody to try to do anything. He's genuinely always helpful, always positive, you know, trying to get in someone's pants, or at least talk about getting in their pants. But just an all-around good goofy guy, and apparently an amazing surgeon.
That was
Right.
actually just the thing that I was going to bring up, is that is the point that comes around so much with the Todd, is that I sometimes keep forgetting that you're actually a very talented surgeon. And that is something that I've always appreciated about this show, is that it doesn't lose sight of the fact that all of these doctors and nurses, they're all amazing at their job as well. Sure, they make mistakes, but who doesn't make mistakes on the job? And even for a character like Doug, for example, like Doug was a character that you just knew from the start, like, this guy's not gonna make it. But they eventually find a role for him that's actually pretty perfect for him. And I always appreciated that about how they don't lose sight of the fact that all of these characters, for all of their nuance and all of their batshit craziness that they have going on, they're all really good at their jobs as well.
Eventually.
Eventually, well, like, yeah, because this first season, like, they all have their moments to shine, and then they have their mistakes, and that's true throughout the course of the entire series. Some mistakes are way bigger than others, and just shit happens. But
But
I
Doug
guess
like still loses bodies and stuff. I mean, he's still not great
Yeah.
with it.
oh yeah,
But
yeah.
at least he's not doing any more
But he
damage.
doesn't get there this season because he's
Right,
got
yeah.
another. Yeah. Somebody we didn't talk about at all yet is, and don't, not to take over, but Ted Buckland, the lawyer,
He
Sam.
he
I
was
mean,
he was the next guy that I was gonna bring up, but yeah, Brian, you brought it up, so
oh,
what?
you
Like, I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about this, because you bring it up, and I'm wondering, like, do you like Ted as a character, or are you just like, fuck this guy? Like, what's happening?
Ted was the greatest sad sack there's been in a sitcom. Just over and over again, the things that happened to him, getting kicked around by Dr. Kelso. Just, they didn't, they showed him to be basically a peon, which was the name of the band he
Yeah,
formed.
yeah.
It's the Worthless Peons. But they do such a good job with him, and the development they continue to do with seasons to come is great. The first season, he's not as important as he is down the road, but it's still the introduction, the when JD gets stabbed accidentally with a needle, and they think he might get hepatitis B, and Ted's got to try and get him to sign paperwork, and finally Kelso just steps in, and it's like, get out of here, pushing him around the whole time. No, I think the Ted Buckland character was just great. And a guy who's a grown man staying at home with his mom in the same bed. So creepy, strange, and funny all in one.
Yeah, Brian nailed it with the term sad sack. That's the perfect, stereotypical sack to put him in. Out of any of the sacks would be the sad sack. Great. Though later on, they do find great ways to use them. I'm not sure if any of the acapella stuff comes up in the first season. Does his acapella band, if they're used, but
Yeah,
just
the Worthless Peons are in the first season.
okay. Just the different ways they find to use him. I love it. He's got some of the greatest reaction shots slash, one liners that most of them aren't even one line. They're just a word or two. Like I said, not knowing exactly which seasons they're from, but when he gets a ride from Kelso in the convertible and he's got the bozo hair, won't go down. Won't go down. Just stuff
And
like
just,
that.
Just hearing him go, oh,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. That's what I was like. It's not even one liners. It's sounds. It's one words.
I think one of my favorite Ted moments is when him and Dr. Kelso's dog are in a they're in a battle to see who could listen the most. It's like, Ted, speak. Hello.
yeah. And then
know,
he
like,
said, and the girls are in there and they say something to him. He's like, I can win this.
Shut up, I can win this.
Baxter, sit. Ted, sit. That's a great scene.
Shake. Left hand. That's your right hand. Hello. But it's interesting also, like, because what a great way to show someone's a sad sack by putting them in an a cappella group as well. And I'm just reading up on it, like this was a legit a cappella group. Like they toured around for a while up until the guy who played Ted his death in 2020. So that that's really cool that they did that, because they get introduced at the end of this season, and they have a couple episodes like each season where they like sing a handful of songs, and except the
Well,
nights.
they became part of the theme of the certain episodes. Like,
Mhm.
this is my band and we do cartoon theme songs. And then it was important because every time they sang, it went along with whatever plot was going on. And I actually believe the episode My Hero is where they're doing the cartoon theme songs. That's second to last episode of this season.
Yeah. So, and it struck me that in the first episode, Ted kind of sounds a little bit like he's just going to be an asshole lawyer who just like don't get sued. Like whatever you do, just do anything you can not to admit that you did something wrong, unless the person's dead, and then fine, you can admit it all you want. That's no problem. But he kind of starts off as like, oh, this guy's I hope this guy doesn't turn into an asshole, and then he's just the furthest thing from it.
Right.
He might be like the nicest guy in the entire show, but you're right, he is the saddest, or the saddest of all the sacks that ever could sack. So, but he's also like an endearing character as well. Like that he genuinely cares. Later seasons, he does kind of like up the dumbness a little bit, but I think he might be the only one that's not like outstanding at his job. From being a lawyer, even though like he does have a bunch of successes, saving people's asses when it comes to them getting in trouble.
Yeah, Ted is an excellent background character.
Yeah. And was flexible enough to use wherever they needed him, to invent. They're like, well, we need somebody to come in and say something to move this scene along. It's going to be Ted, and he does this now. Give him a harmonica or whatever.
Exactly. All right, so couple guest stars. We brought up good old Scott Foley as Sean, Elliot's, one of Elliot's love interests this season. Their relationship, like I felt that it was they made a great couple, but it also made sense why she broke up with him as well.
In the first season, absolutely.
Yeah.
She was starting to fall behind as a doctor. Having a personal life is tough when you're putting that much effort into it. And she just finally had to make the decision, and he did everything he could, stand there with roses. I'm going to stand out here, and then having her walk through them. What a great scene. The roses are all on the ground and he's not there, and she walks through them and continues trying to be the best doctor she could be.
And then the only other guess, or I guess let's talk about John Ritter in this, is that it's interesting because you would think that for someone like JD who's clamoring for like an not an idol, but like somebody to mentor him, that it's very interesting that they picked John Ritter as a character who, kind of doesn't have his shit together and doesn't doesn't give JD like what he needs from like a father perspective. But I think Sam is a really interesting character, and I thought the dynamic between him and Zach Braff was really strong as well. So, Aaron, any thoughts on John Ritter as JD's dad?
But I thought it was great. I loved John Ritter before this and during it. You know what I mean? He Three's Company, Eight Rules of Dating My Daughter, whatever
Yep.
that was called. I watched that for years. I hadn't, I it kind of fell off, towards the end. So before he died,
So he
but saw him in this. What do you mean? I don't know.
he died. So
He,
he
Yeah,
fell
he
off
died.
at the end.
I
He
fell
died.
off from
He died.
watching the
Oh,
show a couple seasons before.
yeah, because
You know,
they continued on after he left. They brought in James Garner and continued the show. So
right. But
no,
I was just
but
saying I wasn't
anyways,
watching it before that. But anyway, so when he showed up on here, I thought it was great. I liked the idea that I thought he did a good job of conveying a father that was there the best he could, but he wasn't, hard to say, he wasn't the right dad for that kid, kind
Oh
of.
yeah, yeah.
JD needed something else. He needed, a go-getter, hard ass alpha male, whatever. And his dad wasn't that. His dad was a good dad that provided and, did the best he could with what he had and how much effort he wanted to put in to his role in society, money making, stature. He didn't care about that.
Mhm.
I believe he was a good dad to the boys, but just not so, he didn't want to be the top salesman. He was
Mhm.
fine just being a salesman,
Yep.
you know. So I thought he played it perfect. I thought it
Mhm.
was really well. And, what could have happened? How did it change? I don't know if they had any long-term trajectories for any characters, but how that would have changed if they could have used him more.
yeah, the episode they brought the parents in, it was, Turk's mom was there and Elliot's mom and dad, Marky Post. I remember playing the mom, and they were presenting a paper to everybody so that the parents were there to listen to it. And then John Ritter just showed up too, kind of thing. And he wasn't proud of his dad. He didn't feel his dad brought anything important to the table for him. He didn't push him. And he was looking for the father figure that was Dr. Cox. He wanted, by then, obviously they worked out the Kelso Cox thing. Now it's just, I'm looking for support, a male figure that can push me and believe in me. But even Dr. Cox was, hey, your dad, I'm sure he would want to come and listen to your lecture.
Mhm.
And he calls him, and then he's like, and it's funny because I don't remember the lecture, but he repeats it back to him in a way that made him sound like he was really interested in biochemical reactions in the atoms of it's like, and then what ends up happening? Well, a buddy of mine might buy 3 cases of staples, so I got to leave, and ends up not showing up. So, but at some point, father son relationship, what you're going to get from your dad, and he's going to be the best that he can try to be, but he also has to try and make that sale that he needs to continue to support when he can. But yeah, I thought John Ritter, uh, you wanted to see the Jack Tripper, John Ritter kind of thing in a comedy, and they didn't really put it out there except for, farting a few times. But it was just another well written job with a guest character.
That episode that you talked about with all the parents, I did want to give a shout out to Arlie Emery, who is the janitor's father. Just
Oh,
inspired,
definitely.
Yeah.
inspired choice
Yeah.
for that. Just what a great addition
How about that? That's great.
Yep.
to an already fun cast.
He's like, get
So
down and give me 20. Dad, there might be fecal matter on the floor.
two other characters who kind of are recurring characters. JD as a love interest before him and Elliot get together. Alex, this was an interesting character that she's a social worker. I like their kind of pseudo meet cute of being stuck in an MRI machine. That was kind of interesting. I'm very confused about how we get from you're a social worker at a hospital to you're a potential drug addict. But hey, whatever, that's fine. We needed a way to break them up so him and JD or him and Ellie could eventually get together. But any thoughts on Alex as JD's love interest before he gets together with Elliot?
I think you nailed it on the head with the meet cute, and I think you've used that term before,
Mhm.
maybe in the movie group, and perfectly describes it. That whole stuck in the MRI, and for some reason you just can't look, or there's no like her wallet's in a locker in the other room. Just go through it. But it was great. What a good setup to set up some anticipation, and kind of like Brian was saying, they got it out of the way with him and Elliot. They didn't do the Sam and Diane 6 seasons of will they, won't they, or however long that lasted in Cheers. You knew it was going to happen. They gave it a few episodes. They let it happen. They gave it, an episode, and then it was,
And
let's
then
move on.
it was done. Yeah, for
But for this, they even did it shorter. It was stuck in an MRI, some sweet, funny bantering going back and forth. And was it all in the same episode, or does he get to see her in the next episode?
It's about 3 episodes, the arc with Alex. The first one, she's in the MRI the whole time. They pull her out of the MRI and he goes, "Oh," and
oh,
they
thank
cut
God.
it.
Oh, thank
Right.
God.
Or thank God, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next episode they show her face, and that's when they're dating and he can't commit to her because he's still trying to do the doctor thing, but then he tries to talk to her when she's on a date with another guy.
Right.
And then the next episode they go with
Well,
the drug
and
laws.
what I was just going to get to, and I took too long to get there. And Brian, you rightfully interjected to bring me back to what I was going to say. Right from the meet cute to the moment what's going to happen, oh, this is happening. She's too perfect. They had to get rid of her.
Yeah.
Perfection doesn't exist.
Well, and just their true words have never been spoken. But they're the I love because the whole thing with her getting stuck in the MRI machine and JD just getting it in his head. It's like, oh, I'm enjoying my time with you, but I'm reluctant to ask you out because I have no idea what you look like.
Right.
And yeah, is that a little superficial? Yeah, but guess what? We've all fucking been there. So like
Right.
if there's ever a time where it's like what an interesting way to bring that up and make it medical show applicable as well. And I thought that was really really interesting. The drug thing, whatever. Like people have drug problems all the time that you don't notice, and shit happens and it is what it is. And then
I'm going to throw it out there. It didn't seem to be a problem for her.
no, it didn't seem to be a problem at all. And then I guess the last guest star before we maybe kind of talk a little bit about some of the patients in this season, because this is just a nice transition. Brendan Fraser as Jordan's brother Ben.
Can we do one? Because I know we're going to spend some time on this. And just in my rewatch, one of the episodes that sticks out that had a guest star, because they had some of the greatest guest stars. And I don't know the actor's real name, but it's just Jack from Will and Grace.
Oh, Sean Hayes. Yeah,
Sean
Sean
Hayes.
Hayes.
Sean Hayes.
He's
Yeah.
I
he's
thought it
another
was a Sean, but I wasn't sure.
he's another intern. Yeah.
But yeah, the episode where he's outshining JD, and then in one episode, they did really good story arcs within an episode, or character arcs within an episode. Nothing gets to me. I don't let the bad in. And then it's like, that kid's gonna last an hour, a week, 2 months, but he's gonna die, and I can't do this anymore. And it's like one episode went from, and it was kind of in the grand scheme of things, if you think it's kind of out of place, because this character who's never been around the hospital is all of a sudden, the number one intern and leaving all in the same
Nick
episode.
Murdoch.
All in one episode.
Yeah.
You know, but I
Um,
totally bought it and I loved it. And I thought he did a real good job of, you know, conveying the stress of being a doctor and how I don't know what the statistics are, but how they don't burn out constantly because of that.
Right. And how they wrote him, you know, they introduce him. He's doing chest compressions on a guy on a gurney, and they do the trumpet, the royal trumpet, dun, 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 as he comes in, and it's Nick Murdoch, and they keep coming to him about that same kid, and like you said, that kid's getting to him and tells Elliot like a pimp, no, when you get home, there's going to be a voicemail on your answering machine where I'm asking you out, but I just don't want to do it right here. And you know, by the end of it, you see that the medical field can crack people. It can, you know, weigh on you to the point where you take everything in that you're trying to help and save, and sometimes you just people die. And I think in a funnier, different way, I believe Turk throws that line out in the pilot. One way or another, everyone stops bleeding. I mean, that's true.
a great line.
So,
But yeah, when
Sean
he
Hayes,
said-
that episode's just that's a killer episode right there.
That in that hallway moment when he's talking to him and he says, you know, what do I say to their parents? He had a good 7 years, you know, and it's like, even just saying that, you know, I don't know why you get a little choked up, you know, it's gotta be tough shit, like, and tough stuff to deal with, not like telling the parents tough shit.
I guess
Now, back to Brendan Fraser. I'm sorry, do you have something more about Sean Hayes?
No, I didn't know if anybody else wanted to talk about. Oh, sorry, you were talking to Matt.
Hilty, yeah.
So like I'm looking back at some of the other random guest stars here that just make like cameo appearances. Like Jimmy Walker is in this, the Dynamite guy. He's in this. Carrot Top is in an episode. Boy, you're right. This show has some pretty amazing guest stars.
It's crazy.
In this, and then this is just like season one, where like you get shit guest stars for season one, and then it just gets like better and better throughout the course of the show. But like Brendan Fraser might be like one of the best guest stars, like throughout the course of this show, maybe one of the best guest star arcs like in TV in the last like 20 years.
Well, you know, the part about Brendan Fraser is the 2 episodes that he's involved with, they don't even stack up to the future episodes when he comes back. So, but the 2 episodes in this, it's, you know, he's got the nail through his hand and it's funny, and you're introducing him to JD for the first time, and that Dr. Cox can have a relationship with another male that JD wants so bad. And it's just funny over and over again that JD's trying to insert himself to be a friend, and it's just not happening, but gets to go out on a drinking night with him. And Brent, you know, Ben is his character's name in it. Ben's feeding me drinks all night and I'm pretty drunk, you know, and talking about, you know, pleasuring a cue stick. And I mean, just the lines that Ben had the whole time, and calling out Dr. Cox for being a dick, you know, and making fun of him in front of JD. It was just all I call it busting balls, like we like to do to Tim. You know, Ben was that guy to Dr. Cox, and just good character. The episode where we learn that he does have leukemia and what the treatment say he's got to go through, and the idea of you like the guy, so rerun the tests, and the things that the doctors go through trying to diagnose and come up with a way to help people. It was just all encapsulated in 2 episodes because of Brendan Fraser. And not to mention the crazy black and white camera bit that he did with it.
Yes.
Yeah, that was so good. Talking about, you know, we don't want to get into where it goes, and everybody knows it was 15 years ago for those episodes.
Right.
But
in the famous words of Mike Hilty, if you didn't watch it, fuck you. You should have watched it.
Yeah, fuck you.
Fuck you.
Gotta be one of the greatest episodes in TV.
Oh yeah, for sure.
By far.
Right up there with the clock episode and How I Met Your Mother, you know, as far as just wrecking you.
Yeah.
Well, even like these episodes, you go into this assuming that you're just going to get a good story about somebody that Dr. Cox is close with, and just something like this could have easily been JD is jealous of this guy, and that could have been it. And he could have just popped up throughout the course of the series, kind of like how JD's brother just pops up like in future seasons. But what we have here is a character who I love that he's related to Jordan and he chose Perry in the divorce. Like I just find that hilarious. But also to have the stones to give him like a life-threatening disease, because that's life sometimes. You get,
Yep.
some people are just dealt shit hands and you just got to do what you got to do with them. And I think that's something that shows just the fine balance that the show really knows how to walk, is that they really know how to amp up the comedy when it is definitely applicable, but then also sprinkling in these heavier moments where it's like, oh shit, like this is like serious. And you see the effect that certain patients have on the core hospital staff as well. Like every season there's at least one or two patients that like everybody rallies around, and sometimes they save the patient and sometimes they don't, and them the bricks, sorry.
Right. The other big thing about the Ben episodes is it shows a chink in Dr. Cox's armor, because he's not going in and he's not there and he's not being supportive and he's not taking his, time to go visit him, because like he says, that's just not a patient. That's my friend. That's
Right.
my friend who's got this disease. And we all know what this disease is going to eventually kill him.
Mhm.
So I don't need to sit in there in his room and watch this happen to him. I will remember my time with him and continue to do my job as a doctor. And it was like, wow, that's a dick move, but it's also how you cope at sometimes when you're dealing with trying to save someone's life or trying to be there and support them or find a way to help them.
Mhm.
Well, and they set the tone, they eased you in pretty early. They're like, this goofy flashback guy talking, external monologue. Within a few episodes, the one where they set you up to think that one person's going to die, and then
Mhm.
all three people, there it's like one in
Yeah.
three people who
One in
enter a
three people.
hospital, you know, and you're like, okay, and they do like a split screen, and it's like, okay, Turk's got this person, JD's got this person, and Elliot maybe has a person, and it's like, all right, so we got to pay attention, one of these three, and by the end they kill all three of them, and it's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready for that,
Mhm.
but it kind of eases you into what they can do later, with Ben. Because if that would have been it, I know it's a ways down the road, but if that would have just hit you from out of the blue, but it's a reason that people watched the show that long. It's because they knew you're going to get laughs and you're going to cry. And if
Mhm.
you don't, you're a monster.
You're an asshole if you don't, feel something for some of the situations that they're in. So, like for example, you've got, just some of the patients that kind of wind up in this. So, second episode, there's the guy that refuses to quit smoking, even though like everybody knows he's on a trajectory to possibly get, lung cancer, or like some type of lung disease because he's been smoking. And just the advice that Dr. Cox gives to JD is like, you can't save everybody, but more importantly, you can save a lot of people, but you can't save people from themselves. And like that's really like solemn advice, even though it's shitty to hear, but it's also true as well. And then in the fourth episode, there is Mrs. Tanner, who she's like, I want to die. Like I'm done. Like what can we do to make this happen? And it introduces just like a lot of like conflicting things about that, because as a doctor, I mean, what's first first rule of being a doctor? Like do no harm, or like some shit like that. Like we cannot do any harm or anything like that.
Do
But
no harm.
when
Yeah.
I don't fucking know, man. I'm not a
It's a
doctor.
Hippocratic oath. Yeah. Do no harm.
Hippocratic. Oh,
Hippocratic. I don't say
no.
words.
But
Hip Hop Anonymous.
Hip hop.
But actually, that episode you just said, it's My Old Lady, episode 4. That's the 3 death episode. Also,
Mhm.
you know, Turk has got the kid that he does the surgery on, and the kid dies. The old lady who doesn't speak English dies, and then the old lady dies. And the moment from that episode that I take from is where Turk's talking to the dad, and the dad just says to him, "My kid was lucky to have you, who sat there with him as
Mhm.
you're not only a surgeon, but you talk to him about the catch with Dwight Clark, Joe Montana, and I mean, just everything involved that they did with those people. And that was because Elliot and Carla didn't have a good relationship to start, because she was stuck up Connecticut, Greenwich girl. And this episode, they taught her to respect the nurses more, because she was dealing with somebody who didn't speak English, and Carla had to help her translate.
What was the surgery that Turk was doing on the kid? Because now that because he had a conversation with JD that made him better at talking to the kid. Because I'm pretty sure it's that episode where, and maybe I'm wrong,
No,
JD's
he starts to realize that his
JD's
bedside
talking
manner, you know.
JD's talking to him about the cool old lady that he met. Because when you were talking about she wanted to die, I totally forgot that. But he doesn't know it yet. He's talking about, oh my God, this lady and this and that. And Turk's like, why do you learn their names or whatever? And I want to say he's like doing a arthroscopic lapendectomy on the kid. And it's probably not a appendicitis or whatever. But he's like, I've gotten really close to him, so I just call him arthroscopic now, or whatever. Like he doesn't even know the kid's name.
Right.
So, but later on, he does like take JD's advice and get to know him, and that it makes it even better.
Yeah, that completely. I mean, he's like, so what's the patient's name? Well, that's appendectomy, and I'm going to take his, appendix out. Oh, he must feel really comforted for you as his doctor, and that's when, he makes the strides to get to know somebody better.
Speaking of appendectomy, JD becomes a patient this season when he's got an appendectomy, and Elliot and Turk have to treat him, and he kind of like flips out a little bit. He's like, I don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah, Turk doing the dance is one of the greatest things. I'm gonna cut you open, cut you open.
I can imagine that doctors make the worst patients, just like, like just trying to like backseat doctor the whole time, and just, like, nope, I got it. I can diagnose myself. Or you could just be like JD in the situation where he's just like overthinking everything, and just like, I know too much. Like it's the same reason why at like my old church, I wouldn't ask any of the teenagers to babysit, because I'm like, no, I know too much. Sorry. Absolutely not. None of you are good enough to babysit my daughter. I'm sorry. Just no.
Yeah, the idea when you grow up with somebody and you know everything or most everything they did that was the screw up part of their life, and then you want them to do their serious part. It's like, I don't care. I remember the fact that you had a water balloon fight with my girlfriend and there were no water balloons. I mean, those are the things you remember. So you don't want them to cut you open and actually be responsible for your life.
Let's see. There's the Christmas Eve episode with the pregnant lady who, that was an interesting episode where talks a little bit, it gets a little philosophical when it comes to like a doctor's faith in humanity. And that's something that gets kind of brought up from time to time. It's like everybody in here is a liar, and this is horseshit. But I thought that episode was pretty interesting, and, obviously parallel to, all the nativity shit that that Christmas is about, I guess. But any thoughts on that particular episode?
I think it was a pretty classic. At the time, you were talking about, when I watched it, you probably watched it on Peacock. It's still got the 4:3 format. It's still airing once a week. Maybe I think we definitely had TiVos by then, but you're barely getting into that. So most people are watching an episode a week, and if you miss it, you miss it. It's gone. kind of the traditional shoehorned in Christmas episode. You know, we do all this silly stuff, and but it is ratings time or whatever, and we're gonna throw in our version of a pretty traditional Christmas episode. Brian?
I think the big thing from that episode that I took away is they let you know early on that Turk had faith and believed in a higher power. And after dealing with a night of people coming in and the drunk driver killing somebody and just what the horrific scenes that you see as an ER doctor overnight at a time when we're supposed to all be good people and it's Christmas time and such, it can make you question your faith.
Mhm.
And the fact that he was up on a roof in looking at the stars and trying to, like, I mean, Carla tried sleeping with him and he tore into her and he's like, this is important to me. This is my faith and this is all I have. And then he's standing there and realizes that this woman in a park that there's no way he ran all that way to get to, but they said he did. And he saves this person and has the baby, she has the baby and he's there for it. And they ask him how you knew. And he said, I don't know. I just knew. So it shows a renewal in faith, which I'm not very religious, but I did enjoy the episode and appreciate those people who do have faith and can have the ability to believe in that. So then when it gets done, in typical Scrubs fashion, hey, we're going to do in JD's mind, it's the birth of Christ in the nativity scene with live people. So it was a well done episode, well written.
That's really it for the patient. So we could hit on a couple of these storylines. One storyline that I wanted to ask you both about is, did you ever buy that there be any potential that Dr. Cox and Carla could end up together?
No.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't know.
I'm firmly with Aaron. The answer to that is no. And I always found that like a weird addition to this season. But Brian, sell it to us.
I don't know if I could sell it. There wasn't. Yeah, well, okay. Now I'm thinking about it a little bit. It's just Turk showed up and he was the arrogant guy who, hey, love you up and down and blah, blah, whatever, rightly and so tightly and ever so, yeah. But that was Dr. Cox too. But she got Turk out of it right away and kind of broke him down. So that's why they could be together. And I don't think you could ever break Dr. Cox down. And she knew that. So you guys are probably right. It was just, I love the fact that they did go on a date and, it just drove Turk nuts. That whole part of it I enjoyed. So I guess that aspect of it, it made me think, boy, this could be a good thing, but you guys are right. It could never work.
I mean, if you relate her to Cox's ex-wife,
Jordan,
both strong-willed, both sassy, both very smart, but very different personalities. And I don't know if Carla's character was written that way because, and we've seen it, the I'm not just a nurse thing. Compared to Jordan, she never had anything to prove to anybody. She could just slap a guy around and, life was just fun and games. And, like I was saying, both sassy, both strong-willed, but Carla always came off as having something to prove, with also somehow maintaining a holier than thou attitude.
Right.
Which Jordan really never did. Jordan knew she was a piece of shit. And Jordan knew the man she loved was a piece of shit. And, she wanted that to work, and worked at that work. And where I don't think Carla would have. Carla would have worked at changing Cox, and that never would have happened. So kind of what Brian was saying.
Right. There is, we got an episode where, JD saves, JD and Turk save a cameraman, and Dr. Kelso tries to take advantage of this by using Turk's race. as, ways to, try to get more people into the hospital. I thought that was a interesting way to do that, even though it was a bit on the nose, especially for the early 2000s. But that's also an episode where JD or Dr. Cox tells JD to do his own evaluation, and you don't really understand why because you just think Dr. Kelso is just being lazy, and then he lets him have it when he refuses, be like, because you need to recognize what you need to improve at. Like I can't do that. You got to recognize it in yourself. I like this episode a lot actually because there's a lot happening with this, and it's got one of my favorite clips is when JD looks like a pro wrestler and it looks like he's cutting a promo, just talking shit like that.
Because I'm the intern.
I'm the intern. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the episode too. What were you just saying? I did like it happened over and over again where you're thinking Cox is doing one thing. He's Miyagi in a lot of ways. A lot of times he's using, pain for growth or, misdirecting you over here to get you to learn something over here. Yeah, the whole thing where do your own evaluation. You think it's coming from a place where, I'm not a paper pushing, this is something Bob Kelso wants me to do, and I'm never going to do that, and then he turns it in and he's like, you took this serious, didn't you? Because this is really important. And you're like, oh shit. And JD's like, oh shit, because I didn't. So, and it's like, oh, I should have saw that coming because, Cox is Cox.
Yeah, there's several storylines, like you said, in this episode. They save somebody, and starts with JD was all excited. Yeah, let's do a promotional thing. You and me, we saved a guy, and here's a picture. You and me, I got my arm around you, and then the only part they use of JD is his hand around him, and it's, hey bro, come and get your, MRI. So, and Turk knew it was coming. He's like, no, they're going to turn this, he was on the one college program twice because he was the black kid. So I actually stole from this and made my staff do their own yearly eval one year and told them to write it out and turn it in. And it was kind of the same situation. They didn't know how to take it. And it was like, hey, it's just a chance for you to self-evaluate. And I think the best thing out of that episode, though, is the end where he is in front of the board or in front of a bunch of the other doctors. And he says, hey, I want to take a minute to talk about one of the interns I think special. JD, he really cares, and goes on about JD. And that's where another time you learn that Dr. Cox is actually invested in JD. And even though he'll never tell him or try to never tell him, but he is actually sees what JD is a caring doctor and sees the potential in him. So it's a huge moment.
To Brian's point, and kind of what I was getting at, like the misdirection, the Miyagi type stuff, and a lot of times it is pain and anguish that he's trying to get you out of your own head or whatever. But both with JD and Elliot, he does the same thing. 3-4 episodes, hounds on him, teases him, whatever. But in the moment when they really need something, it's like he slides the mask over and gives this little sage advice, and he's like, you got to do this, you got to, and then he's like, now get out of here, Sarah, or, whatever. And but it just makes you love him. And because like what Brian was saying, as a viewer, some of these things don't happen in front of him, and to the board he's got there, but several of the things do, like I was saying, where like he actually tells them like, you got to do this, or and then sometimes it's maybe you're not ready for this, and he's just being honest, he's not being a dick, and it makes them once again self-evaluate and usually make the right choice, and they're like, no, I'm doing the right thing, I can get better, learn more, get the Foley catheter in, whatever it is.
Yeah, medical jargon and such,
You had to go to the catheter that goes in someone's penis. Okay.
I mean,
it's the only one I know.
The only one that I'm legitimately concerned about. We have an episode where JD gets stuck with a blood, or gets stuck with a needle that contains contaminated blood, and then he starts to get afraid of being sick, which I'm sure every doctor gets to that point at some point in their career where they're like, I've seen too much, and you just know how bad things can get. I thought that was an interesting take, and that's kind of one of the things that I like about the show is that they kind of give some insight. Like, look, do I know how medically accurate this show is? No, because I'm sure that like every medical show out there, it takes liberties on just some of the weird shit that they talk about. But I still like that it does have some commentary out there about what it means to be in the medical industry and the the risks, but also just the effects that it has on people, no matter how long they've been in the industry as well.
Right. That episode was, they thought he might have
Mhm.
hepatitis B. And it was a good TED episode also, because he was involved in trying to get him to sign paperwork that not blaming the hospital. Yeah.
Was it a? It was a Doug thing that got him stuck, right? Was it Doug?
I do think Doug startled him and the needle went in the air. And yeah, but that had to do with there was the patient who was quarantined and he went in and he was trying to connect with him. That was the Judy Bloom, read the Judy Bloom books, Tales of the Fourth Grade Nothing, changed his life. And then next thing you know, he's worried about seeing him. So he trades him off to Dr. Cox. And that's, he's having that self evaluation moment where he's like, I'm a doctor who's scared to treat patients. Do you want to be my friend? They're just, yeah, there's times where you, like you said, Hilty, you see too much and you kind of back away from it. It tears you up.
And then I guess the last storyline to talk about, the end of this season, when they've spent about a year in the hospital and they're kind of becoming cynical assholes. But Jordan blows them all up by revealing all of their secrets to one another. Boy, what an asshole thing to do. And then not just from Jordan, but the show to be like, I'm going to reveal all these secrets and then we're just going to fade to black. But hey, that's network TV for you. They gotta find a way to get you to come back for season two. And I'd come back after something like that. That fucking sucks to have somebody do that. So, any thoughts on the finale for this season?
It's one of the reasons I love Jordan as a character.
Mhm.
This was perfect. Can't happen anymore. Not enough people watching network TV cliffhanger. Who shot JR? This was better. God, the ecstasy she has in when she's just laying it all out there and naming everybody and he's hitting on your wife or girlfriend. I had sex with him and it was good. Just all of it. Just nailed him
Just
down the
one thing
line.
after, yeah, one thing after
Just
another.
way to blow it up. And what are we going to get next season? Because you've just ruined all these storylines that they could have run with for 2 more seasons. Loved it.
Yeah, this is my favorite episode of the season.
Okay.
And mostly because of that scene, it starts because Dr. Cox kind of gets in her head and, she shows up and they have a booty call and he says to her, you're predictable. Why do you think there's already 2 poured drinks when I got home? Because I know you're going to be here. And, you
Candles are
want to,
lit.
you want to
Yep.
do something, shake it up. And she finished it after she tells everybody everything. And I slept with JD. And then she looks at him and says, how's that for shaking things up? And walks away. And, you know, they whittle down. Turk leaves, Carla leaves, Elliot leaves, and it's just Cox and JD. And then Cox stands up in perfect Cox way and just kicks the chair out from behind him, basically across the room,
Mhm.
and then walks away. And boom, what's going to happen next season? So, yeah, it made me want to come back and watch the next season for a sitcom.
Yeah. So that was going to be my next question, actually. And, Brian, completely unrehearsed, saying, what your favorite episode was of this season. So I will kick it to Aaron. What was your favorite episode of this first season?
It's kind of a cop out now, but it's why I brought it up earlier. That, and nobody corrected me on it, and I think it was the first time where, like, they kind of pulled the rug out of you as a viewer. It wasn't as dramatic as Ben, but in that episode where you're 100% banking on one of the patients are going to die, and then they go and kill all three of them on you, and you're like, oh, this is different. This isn't as formulaic as anything we've watched so far. So that was one that I think kind of turned the tide for me, with knowing what I was getting into, and kind of set itself apart from other sitcoms. Other sitcoms had, a sad episode per season, maybe, dealt with a, very special Webster today, whatever. They all had a very special episode of Different Strokes. Or we're going to go with the, I didn't want to go with the
sexual assault of the young boy. Okay.
Handsy McTrain engineer. Yeah. But like they would throw in every once in a while, or, but this fourth episode, whatever it was early. And every 3-4 episodes, sometimes back to back, they'd hit you with some deep ass shit that made you think, made you sad, made you care about the characters. Other ones, most of the episodes, I wouldn't say are like, this episode is the perfect episode, or this is my favorite. I'm more like clips. So it could be a clip from this one and a clip from that one, and scenes, and and they're the ones that people gravitate to, because when I try to find a stupid GIF to send you guys in a chat, it's like I'm looking up Scrubs, and it's like every one of them, when Turk and it's not, I don't think it's from this season, when they're dressed like pimps, and I think it might be the start of the second season or somewhere.
Second or third season. Yeah. When he
because
he joins
their
the
residents
medical
or
for
something.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. He's gonna do
he does a medical rotation, or a surgery rotation.
Yeah, that's what it was. But like, and I don't want to, like, I guess I'm a basic bitch, and I just like the pumpkin spice latte in the fall, because the things I find funny are the same, like the same shit other people are clipping and find. And I don't have to look too hard to find what I'm looking for, because 4 million other people liked it too. It's I'm not that deep.
Hilty, what's your favorite?
I'm gonna go with the basic bitch answer and go with that first one with Ben, when he discovers that he's got leukemia, and it's not as big of a pull, like rug pull, as the episode that Aaron was talking about, but the thing that JD goes through in that episode, where he's like, this has got to be a mistake, like this, and you're expecting, like a sitcom would normally do, to be like, nope, we mixed up the results, you're fine, everything's fine, everything's going good. But no, they went for it and be like, nope, you've got cancer, dude. Like, this sucks a lot, but most other sitcoms would shy away from that, and they didn't with that. So
when Brian was talking about it earlier, I was just trying to remember the scene. It's when they're in the bar and they're having a good time, and JD notices his hand's still bloody, right? And he's like, whatever.
Well, they both notice it, but yeah,
that's, and then everything changes, and I'm not sure if there's a musical cue or whatever, but just to pile on something that was brought up by Hilty earlier, the music is just phenomenal. Like, they'll just drop in REM banger, or something you're just not ready for out of nowhere, and I'd never put it together that they probably had a huge musical library to choose from.
Yeah, they put out 2 Scrub soundtrack CDs, and they're both real good. They're on Apple Music, and you're welcome to listen to them. But a close second for me, episode wise, was the My Bed Banter and Beyond. It's the episode where they get together and break up, basically in the same episode. They got the pizza as the clock, as they're eating the pizza, the clock is wearing down. But it also has this, somebody's doing a documentary talking about relationships in hospitals, and they talk to Dr. Cox, they talk to JD and Elliot, and basically every one of the stars at some point about their relationships. And it's just so well written. And by the time like the day is done in weeks, it's like less than a week, they're broke up. And they did a good job of not dragging out. And we said this earlier, they didn't drag out the relationship thing. They gave it its just due and moved on from it. And it was a little bit in the background sticking point, but they dealt quickly with it. And it wasn't something that caused an issue in the show. Like they've always said, the thing that killed Moonlighting was, Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd got together. And so it was, I think the writers handled that well too in that episode.
The only issue I have with that episode is the amount of pizza and sex they have. You don't eat like that much pizza, like, and maybe it's because I'm 50, but I mean, even in my 30s, it's like I'm pretty full. So
I think also to Aaron's point, one thing that I will point out, if we're looking at clips and if we're looking at parts of the episode that made me chuckle, there's two in particular that I like, as always stood out for me this season. Is that one, the concept of having a stuffed dog is fucking ridiculous to me, but it's hilarious because they just have Rowdy just sneak up on people. And I just, anytime that is a gag that I just loved throughout the course of the whole season, or the whole series for that matter. Right. And then one other one is that there was one in the episode called My Two Dads. There was a moment where Dr. Cox and Dr. Kelso are fighting like Obi-Wan and Darth Vader. And just to me, that's one that I always look back on and be like, these aren't just like stupid, ridiculous things that like just come, like these can actually be like pop culture referencey things and things like that. And I was like, that's really cool. And just from that point forward, I was like, how much more inventive can these things get? And we just barely scratched the surface this season, but those were some of my favorite moments. Because Aaron, I think you're totally right that like not every episode is a winner through and through, but yeah, there's definitely clips and moments where like, yeah, that this would elevate the episode, but also the clip just stands on its own.
Right. And in every episode there's something outstanding. Mm-hmm. Whether it's, a scene or the best one-liner that you've ever heard, and it just happens to be not like the best episode, but like my wife and I are big fans of NCIS, and I've watched that many times through because it's on regular TV and you can just put it on, clean the house, do the dishes, cook dinner, and just leave it on the whole time. But in that, there are long stretches of storylines that we just skip. If it's on, the whatever Oprah's network or whatever, that the OWN network, or
Ion.
Yeah, Ion's another one. But it's on like 3 or 4 different networks, or it has been at times where we could watch it like 3 days a week. There are long stretches that if it's in a particular storyline, like we just know we're not going to watch it for a few days or this week on this, because, this channel, it's in this string of. With Scrubs, it doesn't matter. There isn't a storyline or a stretch or even an episode I don't think I would turn. I'd, whatever it is, there's not like one that's like bad.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah,
I would have to agree. And for this to be the case for the first season, that's a really strong indication of where the show's going. It's not until like season 6 where there's like a couple storylines that I'm like, I'm not feeling it. And that's not necessarily the show's fault or anything like that. That's just kind of the natural progression of a show. But also, it just goes to show that they've built up enough collateral that by the time season 6 rolls around and there's a couple storylines, and I'm like, they've done their job at that point. And it just remains great throughout the course of the whole series.
And
Yeah.
a big credit to Bill Lawrence, the
Mhm.
creator of it. The only thing he really had under his belt before this was Spin City. He didn't have a lot of TV involved. He didn't, he kind of new on the scene thing, and throws out Spin City with, obviously Michael J. Fox, and then Charlie Sheen and Heather Locklear. And a lot of those characters actually guest starred throughout Scrubs, and, just turned that into going into Scrubs, and then continued making shows that he's still doing stuff today that people talk about. A lot of the great stuff he's done, like Ted Lasso had a cult following, and one of the shows I love is Shrinking, that
Yep.
is on Apple Plus. Just a great show. So yeah, Bill Lawrence deserves a lot of credit for what he did with Scrubs.
I would have to agree with that full-heartedly. So any other final thoughts? Anything else that we didn't cover? I feel like we covered a lot of ground, but is there anything else that we didn't cover that you wanted to get off your chest or talk about before we wrap up?
Nothing jumps to mind for me right away. If we were going to rank characters we like, and that probably not the right time to do this, but out of the main ones, and I almost don't want to open this can of worms, because if we're wrapping it up, but I'm going to say it.
No. You've done it already. So
I've already said, Carla just never did it for me. I some of her decisions, and good character, and I think she played the character the way she was supposed to, but she just, out of all the other characters, just looking at a list, she is my least liked character. And there isn't a single reason why. I don't think she's not evil, she's not mean, she's just never got some of her decisions, and like I said, just she always had a kind of a chip on her shoulder, and maybe it needed that a downer kind of character, and I don't know, but that would be the only thing that we didn't really touch on. But I'm sure if this continues, we'll have many more opportunities to dissect individual characters and thoughts and stuff. But
yeah. If we're talking about character hot takes or anything like that, is they're trying to think, because there's a couple that I possibly have. Is that my favorite character in this season is Dr. Cox, and this kind of been pervasive throughout the whole series, is that as you get to know Perry as a character, you realize that like he's an asshole, but he does have a strong heart, and he really does care a lot. And that's something that I always admired about him. And also, there's these pockets of moments where like he's an amazing doctor, but like you see it kind of just how much he cares, and how that translates throughout the rest of the series. So Dr. Cox is by far my favorite character in this season, and consistently throughout the show. But kind of how you feel sometimes, or kind of how you feel about Carla, I kind of feel that way sometimes about JD. Like to me, sometimes JD can just be too much with the getting in his head, being overly sensitive about stuff. Maybe that's what makes him such a great main character, though, and a great narrator in that way, because he's second guessing himself a lot. Like he really is amazing at his job, but there were some times that JD as a character just loses me a little bit. And this season is the season that he's the most toned down as well. It just gets like later seasons, it gets to be a bit much for me.
that's totally understandable.
Brian, any character
I,
hot takes that you want to?
I guess I would go a little different route than you guys. An underrated character from it, I guess, would be, to me, Laverne Roberts. And she does build as the seasons go on, but this season it was a character who was there, who kind of was the slap yo mama kind of character, who was just there as a just token kind of, this is the person who's here saying the funny stuff. But as the seasons go on, and the writing for her builds, it's you appreciate Laverne more and more. So
Mhm.
for the first season, was where you see the character develop to, Laverne was a little underutilized in the first season.
A little.
Well, and I guarantee like your knowledge of where she becomes or what she becomes. I don't want to say it's clouding your judgment, but you see what's gonna happen with
Right.
her.
That-
Yeah, she's a totally awesome character. And then after she passes,
she dies.
and they
But-
bring in Shirley.
Oh my God. That's
Just reminds me so much of the movie Beer Fest, where Landfill dies and then they just bring in Gil. It's like, hey, I feel like I've gotten to know you all so much. Will you just all call me Landfill? What the fuck is going on? What is this? But it's hilarious though. But it's so funny because since we have seen the show, doing like a retrospective of this and being like, boy, like this is how they were during this season and how they end up becoming towards the end of the series. It's like, boy, this feels very different. And I think that's kind of what I like about particularly the first two seasons, is that it does feel a little bit more on the grounded side and feels not as fantastical as it gets like later on. But that's not to say that I like hate the show for it or anything like that. It's just I think these first two seasons are just where it really hits its stride. And I hope to God that you two would want to talk about season two, because I love season two a lot. So
I want to talk about season 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah.
okay.
I
And we'll stop at
enjoy the
six.
show so much.
That's it.
Yeah.
So
Well, I was already thinking we'd do 1 through 4, then we'd lump 5 and 6 together, and then do the finale.
I have a soft spot for that eighth season. The one pre-interns, the first season that they go to get on ABC. I actually really like that season. So yeah. So I'm looking forward to potential future talks about this. So, guys, thanks for coming on. Greatly appreciate it. Do you have anything you want to plug, or do you have anything? Where can the people find you if they want to continue the conversation about Scrubs? So, Brian, I'll let you go first.
You can find me on the Comics Corner podcast. Comes out every Wednesday on New Comic Book Day. It's part of the SPDM crew, or you could find it anywhere you download your podcasts. Comics Corner podcast with Beelar and Danny P. And also, all of us here are members of the Busting Tim's Balls movie group. And those come out on Monday when Tim gets his head out of his ass and has them edited on time.
Amen to that. Aaron, anything you want to plug or?
Yeah, just like Brian was saying, the BTB movie club. I'm part of that, so you can hear my sultry voice one day a week.
The sultry tones.
But yeah, also part of the SPDM crew. So
Thanks, guys. I'll give you your $5 the next time, or the first time I meet you guys in person. So appreciate the time, guys. Looking forward to future Scrubs talks down the road.
thanks, Mike.
That's going to do it for this episode of SPDM TV. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to anything and everything SPDM crew wherever you get your podcast. Join us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, YouTube, and Blue Sky at SPDM Crew. Check out our website, soon to be out, at spdmcrew.com. Shout out to HiFlyer Creative Studios for making our awesome logo. Greatly appreciate their support. And if you have any needs for marketing, logo, or brand standards, contact them at HiFlyerCreative.com. If you've got a podcast idea or you're interested in being part of the SPDM crew as a guest or collaborating, email us at spdmcrew@gmail.com. Until next time, happy watching, friends.